some salt or whether it's ready for being eaten. So this is what I'm going to do, because I've just literally returned from trade work at the Marikana Tribal Authority in Northwest 2 days ago. And I'm overwhelmed by this data, and I want to share with you some few things that I imagined already. So you will bear with me, because like anyone who has a lot of data and literally thinking sometimes, to some extent in it, I might be all over the place. So the Bakgata in fact, are emulating the Bafokeng model that Gavin has spoken about now, to a significant extent. So in most respects, you could say, if someone asks, what is going on in the Bafokeng? Most of the things I'll talk about here, because I've just given some empirical snippets, just brief, short description and analysis of what is going on the ground. They will fit very well in the Bafokeng community. But I will use this case of Bakgata to argue that since claims and rights over tribal property are politically mediated, disputes over political power cannot be separated from contestations over resources. Struggles over political power cannot be separated from contestations over communal property and resources, particularly in South Africa's mineral-rich tribal authorities. The heightened popular discontent, which I've picked up in the Bakgata Tribal Authority, is most likely connected to struggles over tribal properties and resources, particularly the mineral revenues that are in control of the Bakgata Tribal Authority. And such struggles are mainly fought within the terrain of custom and are expressed through competing claims over correct and legitimate versions of history and custom by various social agents. And another emerging finding that I found so far is contrasting definitions of community and identity, including new forms of social differentiation at village level. Thus, I argue that the Bakgata Tribal Authority area is not only at the center of the new rural-based wave of extractive boom in South Africa, but is also experiencing new forms of mining-related social and political transformations. So I've just been conducting fieldwork in 3 villages. I've tried, I don't know whether people could see that. I've pointed out with red arrows, if that's red, Motlabe, Sefigile, and Lisetleng village. As you will notice, these villages are located very close to major extractive project or mining projects in the Bakgata area. The union section, which has been operating in the area since the the mine has started earlier on. It was not the union mine then, in the 1940s. And Pilanesberg Platinum Mine, if you look at Motlabe, and you can see also Sentibelo project, where mineral rights are owned 100% by the Bakgata Tribal Authority under Chief Nyalala Pilan, and who has also sold a significant portion, which is called Sentibelo West, to Platinum recently. And I must also highlight something which is before that, let me just highlight that if you see there are blocks there within the map, just that I cannot point out clearly. Over there, in the map, I used to before. If you look at this map, these are the 3 blocks where the properties or the mining interests of Bakgata are located within the bushveld complex. Thanks. I can have that. I can use this one for now. Right. The main struggle in the Bakgata Tribal Authority is a struggle against Chief Nyalala Pilan, who is the current ruling chief. It has been going on for a very long time. As early as in the late 1990s, for instance, there's been a lot of battles which has led him to be convicted of many criminal charges. And this was led by one of the oldest movements in the area called Kobako, Concerned Bakgata Anti-Corruption Association. And currently, the struggle is still going on because there's been quite a lot that has been happening around him, particularly the fact that he does not consult with the tribe when it comes to the mining deals and concession, lack of accountability, and an enormous amount of poor governance and a lot of corruption around the distribution of resources and inequality within the villages. So if one take a look at all these struggles, one can easily pick up that these struggles on the surface, they appear to be united. There's a united battle against Chief Nyalala. As this guy has said, as long as that guy Nyalala is still controlling the affairs and properties of the tribe, we can't talk about claiming land, mining benefits, seceding and other things. We must remove Nyalala first, because we found that there are, as Gavin has pointed out, there are villages, groups within villages that are claiming land. I mean, they are claiming to be the descendants of the original purchasers of the farms where mining operations are taking place, and that is quite rough. And this struggle seems to be separated by some of those interests. And if you notice, however, because the courts of law have miraculously acquitted Nyalala of the charges that he was that were laid against him before, now there seems to be a drive towards custom, that there has to be a legitimate version of custom to remove Nyalala. And this is not new. Nyalala was put in power by a certain version of custom. And if the tribe want to remove him, that's why you find the various versions of custom that have come in. In the past, when the relationship between Kgosi Nyalala and the paramount chief, I put that in bracket commas, because in inverted commas, because Bakata, there is a historical trajectory which I'm not going to go into the details, which occurred during the 1870s, where a certain group of Bakata under Kgosi Khamanyana left for Botswana because of the pressure and the labor demands by the Boers in the former Western Transvaal. And some of the Bakata remained. And in the build-up, it so happened that the chiefs on the other side in Botswana, since they were regarded as a senior house, they have enjoyed a significant power over Bakata in South Africa, to such that in 1903, a certain version of custom emerged, whereby Chief Lintwe was able to install a chief in South Africa who was apparently acting on his behalf. So this has happened all along, but there are many other factors that I can talk about around the installation of Chief Ramona by Chief Lintwe in South Africa, a chief in Botswana. And there has been, if you look at it, the courts in Botswana have sort of not recognized Chief Lintwe as a paramount chief, but strangely the courts in South Africa, on many occasions, a chief in Botswana has been regarded as a paramount chief of Bakata in South Africa. And a version of the custom of the chief in Botswana has been used to install and entrench the powers of the chief in South Africa. And it has always been carried on. But there are many other factors that took place during that time when Chief Ramona was put in power. One of the things that was happening was that it was immediately after the Anglo-Boer War, when the British had won, and apparently Lintwe, with his help, he fought towards the British side, and he was able to gain the support of Bakata on this side to fight on the side of the British. And as a result, he had a lot of cattle, after the war, that they had looted from the Boers. So at that time, he had a lot of the spoils of war at his disposal. And Bakata, being land dispossessed and oppressed by the Boers, needed the cattle, and that might have been one of the reasons why his power emerged. He had a lot of, he emerged as powerful on both Bakata in South Africa and Bakata in Botswana. So this is the custom that is still in operation now with his great-grandson called Kgosi Khafela. And this was a demonstration outside the court, the High Court in Pretoria, recently, on the 30th of July, where Kgosi Khafela, or the paramount chief, successfully forced Nyalala's lawyers, in fact through the court, to come and account to the tribe, because he's assumed to be the custodian of tribal properties. And in fact, these women from Botswana and some from South Africa were asserting the version of custom that Nyalala, I'm not good in Setswana, but the meaning of the song was, get out of the seat of chieftaincy, Nyalala, the chieftaincy is not yours, it belongs to Khosi, Kholo Khafela. It was quite strange. I mean, not exactly strange, but it does seem that anywhere where the battles of the tribe are being fought, they have to be fought within the confines of custom and nothing. And this, I mean, the traditional dance, I mean, the traditional attire and the assertion of custom could also be meaning that. But there are differences in diversions. I'm not going to go into details to all that I was going to talk about, but I'll just highlight, even though the struggle itself seems to be very united, there are a lot of differences and divergences within what, I mean, some of the Bakhatla are saying. This is one of the guys who is supposed to be one of the supporters of Khafela, who is now, who have turned, I mean, against Nyalala and is now in a mission to remove Nyalala. What is strange is that government is not acting on this custom, which was confirmed by the courts before, that Khafela has power to remove the chief or install the chief in South Africa. This is what one of the guys says. So for years, the court in South Africa has based their judgment on a wrong version of customary law in order to give power to Nyalala. We are now going to use the same judgment and customary law to get rid of Nyalala. We know that according to our history and custom, Bakhatla have no paramount chief. No king was recognized, blah, blah, blah. In terms of the international law and of sovereignty, there is no person who can rule across the border of Nyalala. We are going to use this very important point. We are going to use this wrong version of custom to remove Nyalala. We shall correct the custom after Nyalala is gone. Custom will sort itself. Now, but there are various versions of custom. Those who are against Khafela himself, who are openly against him, they use what they call meaning that if the big elephant crosses the river, it becomes a small calf. So you cannot cross and be if you cannot cross and be outside, I mean, cross the river and be on the other side, leaving the head behind and still remain the great elephant or the big elephant with power. So there should be an emerging elephant where you have left, which becomes bigger. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about contrasting notions of community and identity at village level, citing the case of Sefigile village. Sefigile village is the village with the oldest mining operations. We've been in operation for almost 65 years, but it remains the most marginalized, one of the most marginalized villages. There is no infrastructure in Sefigile, except for a half-built clinic and a school that has been renovated here and there by the Union Mine. This village is less than 3 kilometers from the Union Mine, the oldest mine in the Bakhatla area. And just at the point where you think if you are driving a small car, you need to park your car down and start walking because the road is becoming impossible, you meet this writing. You say, this internal road is maintained by Anglo Platinum. And you look, where is that road? So this is one of the images. This is one of some, I don't know whether one can call it ideological manipulation or just pure lies, if you want to use layman terms. Now, there are 3 categories that are emerging, because if you talk, depending on who you talk to, there seems to be a drive to expand, for people to both contract and expand their group boundaries as social markers of rights. You know, and if there's 3 categories, there's a group of people who call themselves Bakhatla Basafigile, and these are the people who say they are the descendants of the 52 families that purchased the farms Pisco on where the Union Mine is operating, and where it has taken enormous amount of land that was used for grazing. And there are those who call them the Bakhatla Bakhafela. And there's a group that is called the foreigners. The foreigners, I mean, these are just migrant workers who come in. There's a history of tensions between the migrant workers and the people of Sefigile. So, Bakhatla Bakhafela, and this is one I'll just read it quickly. We are Bakhatla because our land is under the chief of Bakhatla. Hence, we call ourselves Bakhatla Basafigile. We are not Bakhatla Bakhafela. I mean, this is one of the accounts that show some people who say we own this land. But I mean, as Gavin has highlighted, the mediation and the land not being registered by, I mean, to do this to its owners, and which was colonial making. So the group that is called Bakhatla Bakhafela, that regards themselves as Bakhatla Bakhafela, is an interesting group, because though they can see that the chief, I mean, they can say all the things that I've said about the chief, but they still attach themselves to a tribal identity because there are immediate benefits for attaching yourself to the tribal identity, which is, for instance, if you support the chief, for instance. If you look at it, one of the immediate benefits is that of getting your children employed in the mine, if you're an elder, or getting employed in one of the mines. The mines in the area have used a system of using tribal offices as recruitment offices. So if the chief is not in favor of you or that village, the youth in that village will not be hired in the mine, or no will get jobs, small businesses, or the so-called SMLEs. This is the village of Mutlabe, which tried to succeed, is learning a tough lesson from that, if you speak to some of the youth from there. So the foreigners, it was quite interesting to talk to one guy who told me about the story of the foreigners. He said, these are mine workers from the Free State and who took our land by force. Primarily these mine workers, after getting the so-called living out allowance, they started building their shacks behind their hostels. And the mine sent police and demolished the shacks. And then they moved to the grazing land of the people of Safigi. And that is where the tensions emerged, and leading to some of the people being killed by the mine workers. Now the product of that is when you stand specifically looking at the direction of the mine. When you stand specifically looking at the direction of the mine, what you see is a massive stretch of big informal settlement called Kweteza. This is where the mine workers from Safigile started living there with their wives and with their families by force. This land used to be former plowing land and grazing land. As you can see, there's only one person, a local business owner who owns a butcher in the area. I'm standing just in front of his shop, looking at that direction and taking that picture. You can see the small piece of land that still remains, that he has fenced off. But if you look further, as far as the eye can see, that is what we call Kweteza. It used to be called Tulamtswana, shut up Tswana, because there were tensions between the Tswanas and the Xhosas before. Another result of the so-called foreigners taking land is an emergence of another informal settlement, which they called Machela Part, or across the road. This began with two individuals, which are cited continuously when I talk to people, who were from some of the prominent families in Safigi, who started fencing off, portioning off land where they used to plow and selling it. It started with women who were not married, because custom in that area used not to allow unmarried women to have land. They started selling off to land to women. It was called at that time Koma Single. But when they started, when the tribal authority started giving land to women, relaxing the custom a bit, then they sold land to the so-called foreigners or mine workers. And then what do the mine workers do? They build shacks and they rent out shacks to other fellow mine workers. It is interesting that most of these plots are owned by women, and I'm told that these plots are sold between 3,000 and 5,000 rand. There's only one woman I spoke to who bought this land, her land, with 2,000 rand in 2009. As you can see, depending on the size, on the quality, the type of building and whether the shack has got electricity or not, the shack ranges between 300 and 650. 450 to 500. But if it is a brick, as you can see, there's an emerging class, of petty bourgeoisie who can build bricks all over. And as you can see, there's more than 10 flats, 10 rooms there, and they're renting about 650 rand. I'm left with 1 minute. Now, the impact of loss of grazing land is evident everywhere in Safigi and other villages of Bakhatli. As you can see, what has happened is that mine workers have, because they move out of the mine by force, and now they were far away from the entrance of the mine, they cut down the fence close to the section where they live. So people of Safigi use that advantage to graze their cattle, their stock inside the mine. But this comes with serious consequences for people. It's not just a grazing paradise. As you can see, one morning when I was trying to track down one of the key informants, I saw this calf trapped between the two pressure pipes. When I told the security guards there at the mine about the situation, they gave me that attitude that these animals were not supposed to be grazing there in the first place. So with serious lack of grazing land, one is left wondering whether perhaps it is better to graze inside the mine or to have your cattle waiting outside the massive open pit and the processing plant of PPM next to Mutlabe village. So my argument really is that whichever version of custom, will prevail in the end to remove Chief Nyala, it will do very little, in dealing with the inequalities and in helping rural people in the villages of Bakhatla in realizing their constitutional rights. As long as the seat of, gaining the seat of chieftaincy is equated to gaining control over tribal resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonawolo, for an amazing story of what goes on in those tribes and traditional communities which we have inherited from the past and some which clearly are being refashioned as we go along. Tracy will tell us about how our constitution is sometimes failing to resolve some problems of land ownership, tribal claims, land restitution in the rural areas. Over to you, Tracy.
So I want to begin my talk by firstly thanking the organizers for making me the very last talk today. I'm so impressed that you're all here. At the conference I spoke at about a month ago, I had to follow what is probably the world's expert on artisanal mining, who ended his presentation by singing I Just Called to Say I Love You on a ukulele, and you can imagine what a hard act that was to follow. So I'm grateful that I don't have to do that. My paper is entitled Platinum City Deferred, the Bengwenyama Yamaswazi's Experience of Transformative Constitutionalism. And I want to begin by explaining where I get this metaphor of Platinum City, which I think is a very rich metaphor with all sorts of associations that we can't explore now, but it was presented to me at a dimly lit, slightly run-down restaurant around the corner of the North Gauteng High Court by a young member of the tribal council of the Bengwenyama, who was trying to explain to me why his community wanted mining to take place so badly on their land. And he summed it up with this metaphor, Platinum City, as if that explained it all. Now, the issue that I engage with in my paper is really around thinking around transformation and what we mean by transformation and multiple transformations and how they can be related to processes grounded in law. And I look at this issue using the Bengwenyama as a case study. So I want to give you a brief overview of what the Bengwenyama case is about. I'm grateful Gavin didn't get there, so I can tell you something new. The Bengwenyama were in court that day to challenge the granting of a prospecting right to two farms that they regard as their ancestral lands, Nooitverwacht and Eerstegeluk. The prospecting rights had been granted by the Department of Mineral Resources to another empowerment company known as Chinora Resources, and they had contested the granting of that right primarily on the grounds of procedural lack of participation, lack of consultation with the community on the part of Chinora in a series of litigation from 2006 to 2011, and that culminated in the Constitutional Court decision. After that decision, the community were given a hearing by the DMR, but the right was again granted to Chinora Resources in the case of Eerstegeluk, and the rights to Nooitverwacht were granted to the community empowerment vehicle, which is called Miracle Upon Miracle Investments, and then two other community members who are regarded by the community as imposters. And so the Bengwenyama were in court that day in an interlocutory proceeding to challenge again the re-granting of those rights. And that process of litigation is continuing. So there's been two broad trajectories of litigation, 7 years. The first ending in that participation kind of frame, and then the second one based on the bad faith of the Department of Mineral Resources, which I do not think is ungrounded. Now, I think this case potentially teaches us a lot of things. It gives us a lot of insight into mining and rural transformation. For instance, that new forms of rural accumulation and dispossession are integrally linked to the old forms, that the rolling out of platinum extraction arises from the developmental aspirations of communities and their networked experience So for instance, when Sonwabire and I met with the Tribal Council in April, one of the community members was talking about the Bafokeng as their model. And thirdly, that the conflicts over land, mineral and other natural resources put powerful networks of interlinked tribal, local, provincial, national and global players against each other. And in this light, I should just say that the Bengwenyama community, who has fought litigation, it's the Tribal Council, together with their investment partners, which initially were a small group of white male accountants, engineers and a lawyer, and has since been joined, because they ran short of funds to fund the litigation, by the Canadian company Forbes, who's bankrolling the litigation in exchange for an equity stake. Genora Resources, on the other hand, is linked to the Australian-listed Nkwe, which is registered in Bermuda. And Genora Resources has directors who have very links to high politically, strong political links. Their chairman is Sharif Pandor, and the ANC provincial chairperson in the Eastern Cape is a shareholder. And they in turn have recently concluded a deal with a Chinese mining company. So you have this